everyone, welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're going to go over an adorable, quick to make small crossbody bag that is fantastic for beginners, but also, I'm going to say it, if you've been sewing for years, you're probably going to learn a lot of fun tips today. Today, we're going over the quick no-zip crossbody, and this comes to us from Chris W Designs. You guys, this little crossbody is adorable. It is perfect for travel. If you're flying, if you're traveling around, walking around a lot, like let's say you have a big backpack, but you don't want to like put your wallet and your phone and stuff in it, you need easy access, this is a great option. It has this adorable flap on the front. In today's video, we're going to be going over a Velcro closure because we are trying to keep it very beginner friendly. And in my mind, beginner friendly a lot of the times means you don't maybe have all the tools. Maybe you don't have the big rivet press. You don't have all the tools for setting a snap. So you don't need any tools to use Velcro. You just need Velcro. So when we open this up, on the front, we actually have a couple secret slip pockets. So we have one small slip pocket right here, which is so cute. It's called the key pocket. On the back, you have another secret slip pocket, which is much larger, and it would be for your phone. I just want to see. So I have a pretty large iPhone, and my iPhone tucks in there, snug as a bug in a rug. Perfect fit. When we open up the inside of the bag, we have one small little card slot pocket, great for your ID. And other than that, that's all we have in the flap. So no zippers, no zippers. And honestly, it doesn't need it. I'm a big fan of zippers on bags, but it doesn't need it. Now you'll see that this strap is a non-removable strap. It is adjustable. We do have a adjustable strap slider on it. However, it does not have the swivel hooks. You could easily adapt that. Instead of using rectangle rings up here at the top, just use D-rings and then build a crossbody strap with swivel hooks. I have a whole tutorial going over how to make a bunch of different types of crossbody straps, and you could make this a removable strap. However, I wouldn't, because I feel like if you added the hardware for the removable strap, it's gonna get a little chunky and hefty, and you're gonna have a lot of metal going on here, and you just don't need it. So if you love the material for this bag I'm showing right now, it all actually comes from the Bag Making Babe subscription box. This is a every other month subscription box targeted towards beginners, meaning you haven't sewn a zipper, and that's okay because we don't have a zipper on this bag. You don't have a whole lot of experience. Now, just because you're a beginner doesn't mean what you make is going to look homemade. It can still look like a pretty professional bag that no one's gonna believe you made because they don't know how awesome your skill set is yet. The subscription box is not required to follow along in today's video. You can use whatever material you'd like. I am sticking with bonded nylon and no interfacing and no stabilizer, which still, the bonded nylon on its own gives the bag plenty of structure, and it is easier to work with, and honestly, it just takes a lot less time because you don't have to fuse anything. Thank you so much to Chris W Designs for allowing me to feature your pattern on the channel. I think this is the first video we've done with them, and I have gone through the website and I have a long list of patterns that I want to do from Chris W Designs. So if you go check out their site and you see a pattern you would like featured on the channel, please make sure you leave a comment down below. Thank you also to the Bag Making Babe subscription box for sponsoring today's video. Like I said, it is a fantastic box for those of you who are just starting out, or for those of you who just don't want to have to go buy a bunch of different material and hardware from different places. I'll be honest, on my videos, one of the things I get asked the most is, can you just make a list of everything you use in the video and then tell me where to go buy it? And unfortunately, a lot of times when I'm pulling from my personal stash, that stuff's not even available anymore. A lot of this custom material, it's only available for a short amount of time, and then it's not available anymore. And so this is one of the best ways. These subscription boxes, it's one of the easiest ways for you to get all the material that I picked out for a pattern that I picked out, and it's all in one box. And usually it's a much discounted price versus if you were gonna go buy all those things separately from different shops. All right, guys, this is a fun one. You're gonna learn a lot of great tips. Let's get started. So for this bag, you really don't need a whole lot of material. You can mix this up and make it kind of scrappy. We're gonna stick with just two pieces of material today, and we're gonna interchange the exterior and the lining with both of these materials. These are both bonded nylons, and one of the many reasons why I love bonded nylons so much is because it works perfectly as an exterior or a lining or both, as you'll see today. So you're gonna want about a half a yard of your exterior material and about a half a yard of your lining material. The more the better. If you have the kit, you're gonna have a lot of material left over. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't even have to cut into the second kit. I'm able to make 2 bags using the amount of material that was given in the kit. You just don't have all the hardware for 2 bags. I'm not using any interfacing or stabilizer. Now, interfacing is usually used with a woven material to prevent it from fraying or stretching. Stabilizer is used usually to give good structure to a bag. Since this is a very beginner-friendly bag and we are trying to keep it as simple as possible, no interfacing, obviously because we don't need it, and no stabilizer. This bonded nylon is going to give the bag enough structure. So next we're going to be using webbing for the strap of the bag. You can definitely make your own. You have enough material to do that if you'd like. However, I like to keep it really easy, so about 54 inches of webbing is great. This is 1-inch wide webbing. Then we have our hardware, which is 2 rectangle rings and a strap adjuster. These are both 1-inch wide hardware because that's what our webbing size is. Since we are using 1-inch wide hardware and we're not using 3/4 inch hardware, we will have to change the measurements on just a couple pieces of material. Then we have a sew-in bag tag, and then I have my metal bag tag. And then we're gonna be using Velcro for the closure today. If you wanna use a snap or a magnet, you can definitely do that, but we're gonna stick with Velcro. So here's most of the other stuff I'll be using today. Good amount of clover clips, a pair of snips, a stiletto, and a ruler. Those are the things I just always keep next to me at the sewing machine. The thread I'm going to be using today is from Wizardry Stitchery in color black. It is a Tex 45 weight thread, and this is the thread that goes through the needle. Through the bobbin, I have a Gutermann Mara 100 weight thread. I cannot use this thicker thread in my bobbin. It hates it. So I have to use a more lightweight thread, but still a polyester thread. No cotton thread on bags, please. Then the needle of choice I have is a Microtex 8012. I have 2 different sizes of double-sided tape, an 1/8 of an inch and a 1/4 inch. I always suggest if you're buying double-sided tape, try to get both sizes. You never know which one you're gonna need. You're gonna like having them both. Then Beacon 3-in-1 glue. I'm really just using this for my bag tag. So if you're not using like a metal bag tag, you probably don't need to use this today. A lighter for cleaning up any little loose threads. A turning tool. I usually have a turning wand, but I'm actually out of them right now in my home, so I'm gonna have to grab one of those. A seam ripper, because I'm not perfect. And then 2 types of marking pens. I have an erasing marker and a chalk marker. Just 2 ways to see things depending on the color of the material and the type of material. So let's go through the pattern pieces, and like I said, I'm mixing up the lining and the exterior. It's all gonna work the same way. First, you're gonna need 2 cuts of your body top. This is gonna be on the exterior, and this is gonna be the very top of the bag on the front and the back. Then you're going to need 2 cuts of material for your body center. Obviously, this will be on the center, and it will be on the front and the back on the exterior. I'm using that beautiful pattern print for that. And then you're going to have 2 cuts of material for your body bottom. This is, again, on the exterior, and I'm going to be using the black fabric for that. Next, we have the flap. I'll be using 1 printed fabric and 1 black fabric, and you can use 2 black. You can use whatever you want here, but I'm actually going to use the printed material as kind of like the underside and then the black material as the top, just because I like the contrast. But you do need 2 cuts of material for this. Make sure you keep these printed pieces out because they do have marked places for things like magnetic snaps, which is what we're going to use to help us with the Velcro today. Then I have 2 cuts of material for the card slot for the lining. And then you're going to have 2 cuts of your lining material for the lining body. All right, here are the last 3 cuts. First, you're gonna have 2 cuts of material for your strap tabs, and this is what's gonna go with that rectangle ring. I added an inch to the height. So when you're looking at the measurements, it's showing you in width by height. I kept the width the same, but the height, I added 1 inch to accommodate my 1-inch hardware. If you're using 3/4 inch hardware, you don't need to make any changes. If you're using a different size, you do. So I have 2 cuts of material for that. Then I have 2 cuts of material for the phone pocket. This is actually like the lining material, and this is going to be that little secret slip pocket on the back of the bag. And then 2 cuts of material for the key pocket, which is again like a little secret slip pocket, but it's really just the lining piece of it, and it's going to be on the front of the bag. So let's start with building these strap tabs. Flip these over to the wrong side, and you're going to mark a midpoint line on the back going the long way. So it's like 3 layers of the longest lines. And I'm going to just fold these back wrong sides together so that the raw edges meet that midpoint line. Now, I'm not going to be using double-sided tape along that midpoint line right now, purely because where that midpoint is going to be a fold. We're going to fold this again. And I don't want to have to stitch over that much double-sided tape. If you're comfortable doing it, go for it. If you want to iron your material, you can do that too. But I'm just going to fold this back, use some clips, and clip so both long raw edges are folded back wrong sides together to meet that midpoint line. Okay, now before we get too far into this, you're going to open one end of your strap tab and you're going to fold it right sides together just like this, see? And then you're going to fold it in half again. Now this is a little tricky, you might have to unclip, that's why we have those lines so we can redo this. But you're gonna unfold it like that, and then you're gonna see you have a folded edge on one side and you're gonna have raw edges on the other. You're just gonna fold in the folded edge and raw edges together. It's kind of like a little meaty sandwich here. There we go. So it looks kind of like a mess. It does. And then the other edge of that strap tab does not get folded. You're gonna repeat this with your other strap tab. Again, just folding in one of the short edges by unclipping, folding the material right sides together, and then folding it a second time so the raw edges come to the folded edge, and then use some clips to hold that in place. All right, now I'm going to take both these to the sewing machine, and only on that little double fold bunch that we have on one end of each strap tab, I'm going to stitch at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Okay, once you have that stitched in place, you're going to just cut the corners down of that little 1/2 inch overhang. So make it like a little triangle, just like that. And then this is what's cool. I've never done this. You're gonna refold it back in. You're just gonna kind of pop it in there, tuck it in, get your turning tool of choice, and poke into that corner as best you can. You might find that if you spread along the fold, you can really get it to pop out nicely. There we go. And then, if you lost some of your clips or anything, just refold those long edges back to meet that midpoint line and flip that little bit in. Poke it out again. Just take your time and get it just right. And then you're going to fold the two folded edges here on the top and the bottom to meet each other. So those raw edges are just tucked in there. You don't even see them. And look at that. You have a perfect little end. Do you know how wonderful your straps are going to be now? I have made so many straps, and I don't think I've ever seen that method done before. But that is like a perfect finished end. I mean, it's just perfect, and it's way easier than any other method when making straps. So repeat that with your other strap tab and write this down. Don't forget how to do this because it's amazing. Okay, so now with your strap ends, you should have one short end that is beautifully finished and then another short end that is still raw, and then you have a folded edge on one of the long sides and a double folded edge on the other long side. Now we're just going to go top stitch along all 4 edges of each one of these strap tabs at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I suggest you start and stop on the raw edge of your strap tabs and just go nice and slow. Take your time to get really good, clean top stitching. Once you have those top stitched, grab 2 rectangle rings, and you're going to thread the end that is the finished end, the nicely folded end, through the rectangle ring and fold it over. And we're gonna fold this down by about 1 inch. So you can eyeball it. Just make sure it's the same on both of them. So I'm just going to use my ruler here to measure. Yes, it's about 1 inch. And I'm going to add a clip. I'm gonna do this for both of my rectangle rings and strap tabs. Now we're going to take these 2 strap tabs to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to stitch a little box around these fold over bits of each strap tab. I'm going to start underneath the rectangle ring, and I'm just going to stitch right underneath that metal bar, making sure I don't hit it, and I do like to use a zipper foot for this. And then I'm just going to trace the stitching that I already have on that fold over along the side, the bottom, the other side until I go back to where I started. I do like to back stitch a little bit at the beginning and the end for these. If you also want to tie off your threads, you can, but you could just do back stitching. If you prefer, you can also do a little X inside of that rectangle, top stitch a little X in there. That will help keep the straps a little bit more durable. Do this for both of them. All right, so as you might have noticed, I opted to not do the X in the rectangle. I'll be honest, this is a smaller bag, so I think that just the rectangle will be enough reinforcement. If you feel like you're gonna be carrying some really heavy things in this small bag, then yeah, I would do the X or rivet. All right, you can set these little cuties to the side. So since I'm doing Velcro, I'm going to attach the Velcro portion now. So you're gonna pick which of these you want to be the front panel and which you want to be the back panel. I think I'm gonna have this one with a pretty pink flower be the front panel. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to use the magnetic snap placement as my guide for my Velcro. So I'm just going to pop a hole in the center of the magnetic snap placement there. And I'm going to overlay this on my cut for my front center panel here. And I'm gonna grab a marking tool of some sort, and I'm just gonna mark right through that hole to transfer the placement to my material. And now I'm going to attach my Velcro vertically. So I'm going to take my little piece of Velcro, and this is the soft side, not the rough side of the Velcro. And I'm going to add just a little tiny bit of double-sided tape right centered on the back of my Velcro. And then I'm just going to take the paper off of that. And if it's easier, you can kind of fold your Velcro fuzzy sides together like this so you can get the center of it, match it up with the midpoint on your material, and then just open it up. Try to make sure it's the right direction mostly. There we go. So now I have that on my material, and this will be my closure. So now I'm gonna go to the sewing machine and just top stitch down this piece of Velcro at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance going around all the edges. Make sure you back stitch at the beginning and the end. And maybe I would also suggest tying off the threads on the back. So I'll show you how to do that. All right, so it might be a little tricky to see, but I have these long threads on the front and back. And of course I have white threads on the back where it's white, and I have black threads on the front where it's black. But what I want to do is I want all 4 of these long threads to be on the back side. So to do that, you might see I already have my black thread kind of looping. I'm just going to pull that back. And you can just kind of tug on your bobbin thread, which for me is the white thread, until you see a little loop of your top thread coming to the back. And then just pull on that to bring it back. So now I have all 4 of my threads, my 2 bobbin, my 2 top, on the back side here. And I'm just going to tie them in 3 tight knots. Okay, so now we have our Velcro firmly in place. So we've got to remember that panel with the Velcro is your front panel. So you're going to grab your 2 body centers and your 2 body bottoms, and you can lay them all right side up, kind of line them up. If you have specific material and you want it a certain way, line it out the way you want, and then take that body bottom and flip it right side down along the bottom edge of your body center so that they are right sides together, and clip along this edge. Do this for both the front and the back panels. And now we're going to stitch along both of these clipped bottom edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you back stitch at the beginning and the end. So once you have that sewn, you're going to want to press the seam open. So I'm just going to give it a firm press down, that base panel, and then I'm going to go to the back and I'm going to finger press these open. You can iron if you'd like. I'm just going to give it a good finger press because I know I can work with this at the sewing machine. And so I know that this is a beginner bag, but you got to learn how to work with nylon. So I'm going to do this for both of them. I'm going to just finger press them back. And like I said, you can press it with an iron if you'd like, but you can really hold on to this mostly at the sewing machine. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine now, and making sure that the seam allowance stays pressed open, I'm going to top stitch on both the top and the bottom of that seam at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do that for both of these, back stitch at the beginning and the end. All right, so now I'm going to add my bag tag while I'm here. Totally optional, but I like it right along the bottom edge here. So I'm going to take my front panel. Remember, my front panel has the Velcro. I'm going to take my front panel and I'm going to fold it in half. And if you haven't already done so, you should probably start marking midpoints on the tops and the bottoms of all these. I'll do that in a minute, but I do want to mark the midpoint right along that seam I just got done top stitching. So I'm going to do that with an air erasing marker by just pinching it and then drawing on that pinch. And I'm going to take a ruler. I'm going to measure about 3/4 of an inch from that seam up. And I'm going to use my washer here to mark placement for my prongs. And then I can grab my seam ripper and I'm just going to rip very small holes right along those marks. And then I have a little piece of scrap nylon here, and I'm also going to add this using this washer. So this is just to add a little bit of beef. If I had stabilizer like fusible fleece on the back of this, then I wouldn't need to do this. But since I don't have anything kind of protecting that material from ripping more if this tag ever gets pulled on it, it needs a little something extra. So I'm going to just use my seam ripper to rip the little slits on that scrap piece of material. It could also be a scrap piece of stabilizer if you have it. I'm just trying to assume you don't, just in case. So then, with my bag tag, first thing I want to do is make sure that this is correct. So I'm just going to kind of push the prongs through those slits. Make sure it looks good. That looks great. Now, on the back of my metal tag, and I only do this with metal tags, not sew-on tags. Sew-on tags are much easier, but I'm going to add some of this glue to the back of the metal tag, because I did find over time that if this tag catches on something or gets pulled on, it can break, it can rip out of the material. So by using the glue, we're just making sure it really sticks to that material. So I'm gonna push it back in, get it the way I want it. Looks good. Flip it over. And then I'm gonna add my scrap piece of material over the back. And then I'll add the washer. And I'm gonna fold the prongs in on themselves. Once again, taking a look from the front, making sure it looks good. Going back to the back, and if you have any duct tape or anything, I do suggest you add it over those prongs so those little metal pieces don't rub against your lining and create a problem in the future. This will just make sure the bag lasts a very long time. There we go. Okay, so now we're gonna work on the back panel. So take your front panel and set it to the side. So grab your back exterior panel and grab your cuts for your phone pocket. And what we wanna do is we wanna mark the midpoint on the top edges of all three of these pieces. So I'm gonna fold this in half, and I'm just going to pinch right along that top edge midpoint. And I'm gonna use scissors here to just cut right along that top corner. I'm gonna do the same thing on the bottom of my exterior panel. I'll need it in the future, so might as well do it while I'm here. And then I'll grab my little phone pocket. These are kind of like lining pieces, and I'm going to mark the midpoint along the top short edges. You don't need to mark the bottom unless you want to. I'm just gonna do the top. Okay, now take your back panel and lay it right side up, and then grab one of your phone pocket pieces and lay it right side down, so the right side's together, and line them up at the midpoint marks and clip together along that top edge. You'll notice that the phone pocket is not as wide as the back panel. It is not supposed to be. Now you're gonna sew along the edge that's clipped at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you're back stitching at the beginning and the end. Okay, so I forgot to turn the camera on for that. I apologize, but you can see my black line. I only stitched right along where my phone pocket is. Now you're gonna take that phone pocket lining piece and you're going to press it up and away. If you wanna press it with an iron, you can, or you can just give it a very firm finger press. So now grab one of the top exterior pieces and you're gonna lay it wrong side up, but you're gonna be focused on the bottom edge of the wrong side, so when it's flipped up, it'll be like this. You see, so the bottom edge of the right side is gonna be the top edge. You know what I mean. I'm using a solid here to make this easier. So like I said, this top edge here that I'm looking at will end up as the bottom edge when it's turned right side out. So from each side on the back of this top piece, I measured 1 3/8 of an inch and I marked with my chalk pencil along that bottom edge. So now I'm just going to lay this right sides together with my main panel. And so like I said, see how it's, the bottom's on the top right now, but when I end up flipping it up, it'll be on the bottom. So now I'm going to clip this to the top edge. Now I know that that lining pocket's in the way. So what we're gonna do is we're going to clip the corners first, and then we'll worry about where the pocket is. Okay, so make sure your pocket is nice and firmly pressed out of the way. And we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch from the edge to that mark on each side at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Back stitch really well, but you are not stitching between those two marks. We will have a hole right here in the center. So from the edge to the mark, back stitch at the beginning, back stitch at the end, sew at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I left this a hole. The pattern does say to baste along the edge where the pocket is. I chose not to because I'm using nylon material and those holes will stay. So I decided to leave it just like this. So now we're going to flip this over to the wrong side and we're going to press the seam open. Now I know this is a little tricky, which is probably why they said to baste along that edge. Okay, to help me with the next step, I'm gonna grab some double-sided tape. And this is my 1/8 of an inch wide double-sided tape, and I'm gonna lay it right along the very edge. Now, I'm doing this because ironing this material isn't going to get it as flat as I want it. If you're using a quilt cotton or something, you can definitely just iron this. What I wanna do is add that double-sided tape, and then I'm gonna remove the paper, and I'm gonna flip my top panel up and press it back. Now, it's gonna be easy to do on the edges, but on the side over here where there's no stitching, it's a little trickier. So do your best here to keep it at a 3/8 inch fold over. Okay, so you see I have this hole here and I have my top folded and taped down. And now I'm just going to finger press the bottom. If you'd like to use tape on the bottom piece here where we have that phone lining pocket, you can also tape that edge down, but I'm just going to press it just like that with my fingers. This is gonna look cool, guys. Okay, I know this gets a little complicated. It was complicated for me too, but then it all works out and you're really happy you learned how to do this. So keeping this nice and pressed, we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna top stitch only along the center piece. So from this seam and this fold over we have here, we're top stitching at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance only along the center panel, not the top panel. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, once you have that top stitch, flip this so we're looking at the back side of this main panel and grab your remaining phone pocket lining piece. And I'm gonna grab another piece of double-sided tape. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add this double-sided tape right along the fold of my material. Now, I wish I could show this better. But remember how I folded the top, that black material back by 3/8 of an inch seam allowance? I'm gonna add this right along the top of that fold, like right along the raw edge. And I'm only adding it where the phone pocket is. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the paper off that tape, and then I'm gonna take the remaining phone pocket lining piece, I'm gonna lay it right side down, and I'm going to line up the top edge of this lining piece with the top edge of that fold over so it's taped down. This is what the tape is for, to tape this in place. Also make sure the sides of your phone pocket line up with the sides of the phone pocket you've already stitched in place. Okay, I'm telling you, this is cool. This is cool how it works out. So now your two phone pocket pieces should be right sides together. You'll notice the one on the bottom might be a little bit shorter than the one on the top. That's okay. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take both of these short edges and I'm going to pull them up together by about 1/2 of an inch. And like you can see, they're not even. That's fine. If you wanna trim them down so that they are even and then do this, that's perfectly fine too. But I'm folding them both together up by about 1/2 of an inch, and I'm going to pin along this bottom edge here, or clip. I'm gonna use my clips. You know what I mean. Just hold them together. Also clip the sides together, but they should be staying together pretty evenly right now. Okay, so you have the pocket prepped. Now let's look at the front. Now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna top stitch just along the top edge now where that black material is. So you see when I open this, I have a pocket. Isn't that cool? So I'm top stitching only along the top panel at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. So now you see once you top stitch that and you look on the back, you've stitched that other lining pocket in place. That's how it's stitched in place. I love this. So now we want to close the sides of our lining pocket. So we're going to flip our main panel up and out of the way, and we're going to take this to the sewing machine. And we're going to sew along both the long edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. It's a little tricky at the top over here. That's okay. I do find that a lot of times sewing towards this fold over here at the top, especially if you're using a vinyl or something, is easier. So you might want to flip your material around, start at the bottom edge, backstitch well, sew along the sides at a 3/8 inch seam allowance until you get to the top material here. Make sure you don't sew over any of this top material. Just stop right once you get towards like the bump of the top material. It doesn't have to touch it. It just has to get as close as possible, and then backstitch really well. And then all you have to do is flip the panel over and do the same thing on the other side. Like I said, 3/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so you see how we have that, and then we still have the opening on the bottom here, which we will need later because that's how we're gonna turn the bag out. How cute is that, right? And look, it's like a secret slip pocket. It's so clever. I love this. Okay, next we need to make sure that this is secure. So this is just a little bit of extra time, but trust me, you're gonna be happy you did it. So see where your pocket opens and you see how it pulls on the seam right there? We need to secure that. So right where the opening starts over here, I'm going to mark a little vertical line that goes across the body center and the body top. And then I'm gonna mark another one that's about 1/4 of an inch outside of that. Now I'm just eyeballing it. If you wanna measure it, you can. It's really not that big of a deal. Do the same thing on the other side. Right where that opening starts, you're gonna mark a vertical line and then another one about 1/4 of an inch away. Now, if you wanna use rivets here, go for it. You can just put rivets right between those two marks. And honestly, that's probably enough, but I'm gonna be using stitching. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to do a small vertical stitch going from one of the top stitching to the other top stitching. So the top stitching on the body center up to the top stitching on the body top, just kind of connecting those two horizontal top stitchings, back stitching really well. And I'm gonna do that for each one of these 4 marks. And that is going to be what prevents my pocket from ever ripping whenever I'm using it. Okay, with those little extra stitches in place, now we don't have to worry about this ever getting ripped open when we're using it. Okay, so your back panel is done. You can set it to the side. So now we're gonna repeat that exact same process with the front panel and the key pocket. I will walk you through it, but we are gonna walk through it at a bit of a quicker pace. So front panel, body center, right side up, key panel pocket right side down, match up the midpoint marks along the top edge, and clip in place right sides together. And I'm going to sew this at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I just now saw the pattern set a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but since that's what I did on the other side, I'm going to stick with my 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Now take that key pocket and flip it right side up so that it's up and out of the way. So now press your key lining panel up and away from the main panel, and if you want to use an iron for this, go for it. And then you're going to grab your exterior top panel and you're going to lay it right side down, and along the bottom edge on the wrong side of your top panel, you're going to measure in 1 3/8 of an inch from the two short edges and mark. I'm using a chalk pencil for that. And now we're going to clip this top panel right sides together with that center panel, and the key little lining pocket is slipping out the top. There we go. Do your best to keep that as flat as possible. And I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew from the short edge to the marked line on each side at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching really well at the beginning and the end. If you want to baste along the opening, you can, but I'm not going to. All right, so just like I did before, I'm going to grab some double-sided tape and I'm going to apply it to the very top raw edge on the back of my top panel first. Now remember, this is the first bit I do the tape so that I can just get it flat. If you can iron this flat, then by all means do that. But this is just going to help all the other steps. So remove the paper, and I'm going to press at the sewn seams up, and if you basted, you can just press it using the basting stitches. But then along the center, I'm going to just gently press this back so it's pressed in 3/8 of an inch. Look from the front, looks good. And then I'm going to press down the top as well. There we go. There we go. So now I have the top taped down, and then the bottom I have pressed down with my fingers. I'm going to look at the right side of my front panel, keeping it nice and flat, and I'm going to top stitch only on the body center side, so below the seam, at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. I'm not top stitching the top panel yet. All right, so once that's top stitched, we're going to flip this back over, and once again I'm going to add some double-sided tape. And I'm not really sewing over any of this double-sided tape, so it's not a problem. But what I want to do is I want to add it right along the very top edge of the raw edge of the fold over for my seam on the body top, but only where the key pocket is. It doesn't need to go all the way to the sides. There we go. And then I can remove that paper. And then I'm going to take the remaining key pocket lining panel and lay it right side down so it's right sides together with the other one. Line up the edges on the left and the right, and then line up the top edge with the very raw edge of the fold over part of the seam of your top panel. And then use that tape to hold this in place. Here you go. Now we can flip this over and we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to just top stitch right along the top panel, only the top panel, at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. After you have that top stitch, make sure you flip it over to the back and ensure that you did catch the top edge of that lining. That's besides the decorative top stitching and everything, it's kind of the point. So now we're going to just lay those two lining key pockets pieces right sides together and clip along all the edges. If you have overhang on the bottom like I do, you can trim it or you can just leave it. It's up to you. And once you have the sides and the bottom clipped, you're going to want to pull the main panel away from that little lining pocket panel down here. And we're going to stitch along the sides and the bottom all at about a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end, just like before. Just get as close as you can to the material at the top. It might be easier if you flip it like this. Just make sure you're not sewing over the top or the center of your exterior main panel, but you just want to get as close as you can to that seam. Back stitch there. You are sewing the bottom closed as well. Okay, once you have that sewn, if you want to trim down that bit on the bottom, you can. I'm going to just because it's not necessary. And then we're going to flip this to the right side, and just like we did on the back, we want to make those 4 stitch marks or add rivets or both. I'm just going to do the stitch marks, so I'm just going to find where the separation is over here in the corner, and just outside of it I'm going to mark a vertical line, and then I'm going to mark a second vertical line about a 1/4 inch away from that. You can see I'm not measuring, I'm just kind of eyeballing. And it's just from top stitching to top stitching. The top stitching on the body top to the top stitching on the body center. Just back stitching really well over each one of those 4 vertical lines. I'm just using a regular 2.5mm stitch length. All right, my front main panel is all good to go with that adorable little secret pocket. And I already attached my Velcro, so I'm gonna skip the magnetic snap part. So now let's work on the flap, and I'm going to attach my Velcro starting out. I'm just gonna make sure my Velcro would not reach the seam using the template. That looks good. I'm gonna pop a hole right in the center of that magnetic snap placement. I'm gonna do this on the right side of the bottom of the flap. So this is like kind of like the underside of the flap. I'm gonna lay my template right over my flap piece, and then using whatever kind of marking tool you'd like, mark the center of that magnetic snap placement, and then add a little piece of double-sided tape to the back of the rough side of your Velcro. So now I'm just going to take my little Velcro piece here, and I'm going to take the paper off the double-sided tape, and I'm going to fold this in half, kind of Velcro sides together, just so I can match up the midpoint on the Velcro with my little dot. And then I'll just tape this in place, make sure it's straight. There we go. And you just want to make sure that it's not going to get in the seam at any point. So you can grab a ruler and double check that it's about, it's over 1/2 inch away from all edges. And now we can take this to the sewing machine and just top stitch along all 4 edges of your Velcro at an 1/8 inch seam allowance. And you can see that I did decide to back stitch and leave the tails long. You just want to make sure, the Velcro is going to be sticking to the other piece, and you don't want it to start unraveling at any point. So I like to make sure it's just super secure. So I'm gonna pull the top thread to the back of my flap, and then I'll just tie those threads into 3 tight knots. Now take both of your flap pieces and lay them right sides together. And we're going to line them up along all edges, but let's just add the clips along the sides and the rounded bottom, not along the straight top edge. So the pattern suggests using the template and cutting off where the dashed line is around the curve, and then tracing that dashed line on the back of your material so you can just sew over it. I'm fine using the markings on my sewing machine to do the 3/8 inch seam allowance, but I did use a ruler and marked at the very tip on the bottom 3/8 of an inch up from that very bottom point, just so I know as I'm sewing my needle needs to end there before I pivot and go up the other side. So what I want to do now is go to the sewing machine and starting at the top straight edge, back stitch and sew along the sides and the bottom and the other side at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, again back stitching at the beginning and the end and just going very slowly around those curves. Okay, so now let's trim this up a little bit. At the top corner here, I'm going to trim down those corners that are in the seam allowance. And then around the curved bit, I'm going to trim the seam allowance in half. If you have pinking shears, use those. And then also around those curved bits, I'm just going to make little tiny clips into that remaining bit of seam, but not touching the thread. I'm not clipping that deep into it. Just about halfway into that hangover. Now I'm going to flip the flap right side out. Okay, and if you have some sort of stabilizer, you can definitely add that now. Like I said, going loosey-goosey, so don't need it. But I do really want to make sure I round out the edges of that seam so it's nice and smooth looking. And then I'm going to look at the top of the flap, so what you see when it's closed, and I'm going to gently roll out the seam and add clips to get it looking just the way I want. And this is where if you need to kind of reshape it a little bit, you have a bit of wiggle room here to get it how you want it. Just take your time. Once you have all the edges clipped and smoothed out just the way you want it, take this to the sewing machine and top stitch along all clipped edges, all of them, at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. And I do suggest you start and stop your top stitching along the top flat edge because that won't be seen in the end. Okay, once you have your top stitching done, just double check everything looks good. So now grab your exterior back panel and lay right side up, and then grab your flap, and you're gonna lay your flap so it's Velcro side up, so underside of the flap side up. If you don't have the midpoint marked on the top of your back panel, make sure you do that. And with the back panel right side up and the flap magnet or Velcro, whatever, side up, line up the midpoint marks on the top edge and clip together. And now you can baste along this top clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now grab both the front and back exterior panels and lay them right sides together and clip along the sides and the bottom. Make sure you're matching up the seams between the top panel and the center panel and between the bottom panel and the center panel. And then also make sure you're lining up all the corners, the little box corners and the top corners. And now we're gonna sew along the sides and the bottom, all at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. You don't sew inside these box corners, you just sew all the way down the side and then along the straight bottom, back stitching at the top, back stitching at the box corner bottoms, but you're not sewing over this corner. Okay, so now we want to press the seams open as best you can. Obviously, if I press mine open, they're not going to stay open, but I'm going to press the seams open on these box corners. See, I can stick my finger through there. You need to be able to stick your finger through there. If you can't, unpick. Okay, so now we're going to just press those seams open and we're going to pull the panels away from one another, match up the seam on the bottom panel with the seam on the sides, so you have this nice little flat head triangle. And I like to clip right along the raw edge of that box opening, but also clip over on the sides of that triangle. That's gonna hold it really flat and make it a lot easier to sew. So do this on both sides for your boxed bottom. And now we're gonna sew along each of these little small raw edge box corners at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end each time. So now if you're gonna add that firm piece of stabilizer along the bottom here, go ahead and adhere that. I'm not going to though. So now let's turn our cute little bag right side out. So you see whenever the flap comes down, we still have to sew the lining in, but when the flap comes down, it's gonna look just like that. So stinking cute. Okay, get that flap out of the way. Now, if you haven't already, press the seam open along the top edge here. It is important that you press these seams open, because if they're just pressed to one side, it's gonna be really hard to top stitch later. You're gonna grab your strap tabs now, and you're going to lay the raw edge of your strap tab right side down against the top of your exterior bag, so right sides together. The fold over is gonna be on the top here, so I can see the fold over that I stitched, and I'm just going to center this over that seam, making sure that seam on the bag is pressed open. Just like that, and it's centered. So do this for the other side as well. And I think I'm gonna push this up by about 1/2 of an inch. So the pattern says 3/8 of an inch. I find 1/2 of an inch is usually easier. And to make this much easier to do, what you can do is actually take your strap tab with the folded edge facing up towards you, and then measure 1/2 of an inch from the raw edge, and use some sort of an air erasing marker, a removable marker, and draw a line. And now when we go to the side here where the seam is, we're going to lay our strap tab folded side up so we can see that mark, and that marked line is going to line up with the top edge of our material. So we have the top edge of the strap overhanging by 1/2 of an inch. And then just flip this over so it's centered over your seam. And if you feel comfortable using tape, you can always grab some double-sided tape here to help with this step. And there we go. So I'm going to move my other side up by 1/2 of an inch as well. Okay, now we want to take this to the sewing machine and we want to baste along the edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you're going a 1/4 inch below the top edge of the bag, not the top edge of your straps, just to hold these in place. Okay, so now let's work on the little lining card pocket. Grab both of your card pocket pieces and lay them wrong side up. What I like to do is I like to measure 3/4 of an inch from the bottom straight edge and mark a line. So I just used my air erasing marker for that. And then I put a little piece of double-sided tape right underneath each one of those lines. So now what I can do is when I remove the paper from that tape, I can fold the long straight edge back to meet that marked line and just tape it in place. Since ironing's not going to do me a whole lot of good here, this is an easy way to do it. So really your fold is 3/8 of an inch. From raw edge to fold, that's 3/8 of an inch. And that's why we marked double that to help us line it up. And then take your 2 card slot pieces and lay them right sides together and clip along the sides and the top little swirly bit. But you can leave the bottom straight edge that you have folded unclipped. Now we're going to sew along the sides and the top edge, all at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end, but do not sew the bottom straight edge shut, just leave that open. Now let's trim this down a bit. I'm going to go to the bottom corners here, and I'm just going to trim a pretty tall triangle, so just like this. And then I'm also going to trim the sharp corners on the top at a 45-degree angle, and then I also trim down like that tall triangle bit as well. I feel like that helps a lot. You can actually just trim the seam allowance down on the short side, and then I'm going to trim the seam allowance in half along this top curvy bit, and then I'm going to make little tiny cuts into that remaining bit of fabric close to the stitches but not touching them. Now I'm going to turn this pocket right side out. Grab a turning tool of some sort to help you really poke out those corners. And then if you want to iron this to get it flat, you can, or you can just give it a good press with your fingers. I'm also going to use clips to kind of help roll it out. So now smooth out your pocket as best you can, and with however your pocket, you're going to have it in the end facing up. You're going to top stitch just around that top curved bit at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. You can tie off the threads on the back, or you can back stitch, or you can do both. Once that's top stitched on the top edge, I like to measure 5 inches up from the bottom center of a lining panel. So my main lining panel is facing right side up. My pocket is facing right side up, and I'm just going to tape this pocket into place. I'm also going to grab my little bag making babe tag, and I'm just going to insert that into the opening on the pocket on the bottom. And there we go. And so now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to top stitch along the sides and the bottom edge, all at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I do suggest you back stitch at the beginning and the end, and also tie off the threads on the back of the lining panel. Alrighty, if you sewed over your paper tape like I did, you can pull that out. So once you have that little pocket done, now we're going to finish up the lining. So take both lining panels and lay them right sides together, matching up all the edges and using clips to hold together the side edges. So now with only the side edges clipped, we don't have the bottom or the top clipped together, we're going to sew along the sides at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you back stitch well at the beginning and the end. So now with your lining right side in, wrong side out, and your exterior right side out, we're going to slide the exterior into the lining. I'm going to follow the pattern, and I'm going to make sure that the lining side that has that card slot pocket is going face to face with the flap. So the flap is attached to the back. So that's how I'm going to do it. Card slot pocket face to face with the flap. Make sure those tabs get pushed in there as well. Now we're going to focus on the top of the bag. Look at this tab trying to sneak out. You can't sneak out. Get back in there. Yeesh. Now we're going to work around the top of the bag. So you should have midpoints marked along all 4 top edges, the 2 lining and the 2 exteriors. So find those midpoints and match them up and clip together, right sides together. And then go to the sides, spread open the seam on your lining panel, and do your best to match it up in the middle with the seam on the front panel. Now I know it's kind of hard to see because you have that strap tab in the way, so just do your best to center it along the strap tab and making sure the raw edges line up on the top with the exterior and the lining panels. And then just clip along this top edge, holding these 2 things together. Okay, so now we gotta go stitch around this top edge, and it's tiny, I know, so I'm gonna stitch from the inside. I'm just gonna kind of lay it on my bed like this, and I'm gonna stitch from the inside of the bag all the way around at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Go slow, take your time. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. So take a good look at your seam. You can always smooth it out. If you lost control and it's like a big old triangle, bits everywhere, you can go around again and smooth that out. It's no big deal. We're gonna go back to the sewing machine just one more time, and we're going to stitch over our seam over here. You can see that my seam kind of opened up, which stinks, but that's okay. I'm gonna just kind of trim it down a bit, but we want to stitch over where the tabs are. So go back to the sewing machine and just stitch a second row of stitches over your tabs to give them extra support. Okay, leaving that overhang of your strap tabs, you're going to now pull your exterior through that hole in the bottom of your lining. Easy peasy. Now, here's the trick, because you still have this big hole in your lining, right? So what we're going to do is, remember, you also have a hole in the pocket of your back side here where the phone pocket is. So you're going to pull that out and then push the lining into the bag. So the lining is inside the bag. My phone pocket's here, and then I'm going to put my hand into that hole in my phone pocket And I'm going to pull out the bottom of my lining and just tug the phone pocket down. There we go. Now we can work on just closing this hole. So we're going to clip along the bottom edge of our lining here. And we're going to sew along this bottom edge here at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Okay, so once that's stitched, now we just have to box the corners. So we're going to pull the 2 lining panels away from one another. Spread open the seam allowance on both the sides and the bottom, and then just clip right along that raw edge, and then just like I did on the other side, I also like to clip along the folds a little bit further down just to make it easier. So do this for both of your corners, and now sew along these 2 little box corners at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have that all done, you can shove that back into your bag. There we go. And you see that material gives the bag great structure. Honestly, bonded nylon is kind of like, it's like if you were to add a lightweight stabilizer to a thin material. It's the same thing. Okay, before I close the final hole in the lining, I want to top stitch along this top edge here, which tends to be the most challenging part, especially where we have this bulk here. So be careful. What we want to do is we want to just really roll out that top seam and press it firmly. You can sew over multiple layers of this bonded nylon. You just want it to be as smushed down as possible. That's going to be what's helpful. I'm going to push this pocket out of the way. The flap is a little tricky because you can't really clip it, so you're just going to press it with your fingers well. And like I said, one of my seams kind of rolled it over on itself instead of staying open, and I can feel how bulky that is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the table off my sewing machine, so I just have the bed. So the arm of the sewing machine will be there, the bed's gone. So I can just wrap this around the arm and sew in place. You could also just sew from the inside. We're going to top stitch. You can top stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance if you'd like, or an 1/8 inch seam allowance. A lot of times a 1/4 inch is going to be easier. So the pattern shows you can open it up from the inside. Just note that if you top stitch from the inside of the bag, your bobbin thread is what's going to be showing on the outside. I want the bobbin thread to show on the outside, so to do that, I'm going to wrap it around the arm, or you could just flip the whole bag inside out so that the inside is now the exterior, and you top stitch that way. Just take your time here, go slow. You might find a zipper foot is really helpful for this. 1/4 inch seam allowance is what I'm gonna do. Alrighty, I just wanna see it. I wanna close it and see it. Oh, that's so stinking cute, isn't it? That's so cute. And the Velcro is just like the perfect amount. You don't have to push really hard on it. It's not super difficult to remove. I love it. Okay, last part of the bag is reaching into that phone pocket, pulling it up. Remember how we folded down the sides when we were sewing it? So all you should have to do is go into the seams here and pull them, and then the raw edges should just fold in on themselves. If they need a little bit of help, go ahead and help them. And just tuck those raw edges in on one another and clip along that folded edge, just making sure that there's no raw edges. Don't worry so much about if it's a perfect 3/8 inch seam allowance or a 1/2 inch seam allowance or anything. Just no raw edges. Okay, so now once you have the clip, take this to the sewing machine and just top stitch along that clipped edge at an 1/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Once that's top stitched, just push this back into your bag and do your best to poke out the corners and get it nice and flat. So stinking cute. Okay, last thing we have to do is put the strap in place. So grab your webbing or your handmade strap. I'm gonna grab a lighter and I'm going to melt down the edges of my webbing so it doesn't fray. And then we're gonna thread the webbing up through the bottom of your strap adjuster and over that center bar and down the other side. Now you can just have it fold over once like this and have the raw edges there, or you can fold it once by about 3/4 inch and then fold it again down by about 1 inch. Just like that. And now you don't have any raw bits showing. Use a clip or two to hold it in place. And I'm just gonna take this to the sewing machine. I'm just gonna sew a rectangle right along that fold on the bottom and the edges, and then right underneath the strap adjuster. I like to use the zipper foot to help with this. back stitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so now you cannot see the top stitching on this side that I folded over because it's a black thread, but you can see it on the other side, and it's a little wonky on the other side. So I wanted to show you that you can use either side of this as the right side. Oftentimes we'll make the folded over edge the wrong side, but it doesn't have to be. If it looks better, make that the right side. Okay, so now with the bag facing right side up, flap closed like this, and then whatever side you want to be the back side of your strap also facing up. Take the other end of your webbing and you're going to thread it from the inside of the bag towards the right strap, just like this. Okay, so thread it through and then bring it back sides together. So webbing is back sides together, and you're going to thread the loose end of your webbing on the back side of your slider up from the bottom, just like this, over that middle bar and over towards the other side. There you go. So now you see that kind of goofy looking top stitching is pretty hidden. So then we're going to take that raw edge and we're going to take it from the outside on the left side and then thread it through towards the center, just like that. And if you have fraying, go ahead and melt it down. And then just like before, I'm going to fold back this webbing by about 3/4 of an inch, and then I'm going to wrap it around that rectangle ring and fold it about 1 inch, just like this. And now I'm going to go top stitch this in place, and I know I want my top stitching to be on the outer side of the webbing. So to help with that, I'm going to feel and just mark where the fold is on the back. So I did that by just folding this down. I don't know if you can see. See how I just fold it down? And I'm just gonna mark right here. And like that's where I know the fold is on the back. So when I top stitch this, I want it to be below that chalk line and as close to the metal bar as I can get. And I'm going to just use a zipper foot and do 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And there we go. Your strap is done. And obviously the best thing to do so you didn't have any goofy sides would be to use black bobbin thread, which is just not something I thought of ahead of time. So you work with what you got. This is adorable, isn't it? Oh, I hope you love it. It's not the easiest bag in the world, but it is, in my opinion, beginner friendly. But it doesn't look like a beginner bag. Okay, so here's a little bonus thing. I was gonna do this off camera, but I figured you might wanna know. So when I first made this bag, this is not the bag we just got done making. This is a bag I made to test it. I didn't have the Velcro, and so you can see it doesn't have a closure on it. But I want a closure on it, and so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to add a magnetic snap, and these are rivet back magnetic snaps, and I love them. So I know this is for beginners, but I do suggest if you really like bag making, you invest in a Cam Snaps rivet press, and there's like a whole bundle that has OklaRoots. It's like an OklaRoots bundle, you save money, it's a whole thing. But it's great, and I'm gonna show you one of the reasons why I love it so much. So I'm gonna start with this flap here. So I'm going to fold the flap in half. I'm trying to find a good place to put my snap. So I'm going to just fold this flap in half to find the midpoint. There we go. That looks pretty good. And let's see. I'm gonna go up about 1 1/4 inches, and I'm just gonna mark right on the fold, right around there. Let me see how that is. That's a little high. I might want to go a little bit lower than that actually. So the nice thing is I can just wipe that off real quick. Maybe I'll go more like 3/4 of an inch. Yeah, 3/4 of an inch from the edge, and mark a midpoint. And there we go. That's where I want to put my snap. So the first thing I'm gonna do is punch a hole right in that spot through both layers of my flap. There we go. And now I'm going to decide where I want it to go on the bag. And I could fold the bag and measure and do all that, or I can just make it as flat as possible and then do it like this. I think an air erasing marker might be easier here. And so I have that hole in the flap, and so I'm just going to stick my marker in that hole and mark on the main panel where the next one's gonna go. Okay, now I gotta be a little careful with this part because this is a pocket, so I don't want to cut through all the layers. But I can put the rivet through this pocket. So making sure the pocket's very flat and straight. I can grab my hole punch and just push it in here and punch through the inside of that pocket. There we go. So now I'm going to put the female snap on the pocket. So I'm just going to push the, see how it has like a, it's like a rivet back or like a, you know, a stem. I'm gonna push the stem through that hole. And you can see inside the pocket, here it is. And then I can just grab a cap, which looks like a rivet almost. And there we go. And then for the flap, I'll put the skinnier male piece, popping that through the hole on the underside of the flap. And then attaching the rivet on the top here. So now let me give it a quick test. And there we go. Super simple. So now the only thing I have to do is set these. So I have 3 pieces for my die set. I'm going to start with the piece that looks like the female end of a snap that goes in the bottom. The piece that screws into the top looks like it's for a rivet because it's for the rivet side. Now the female bottom is going to go with the male side. So I'm just going to slide that in, snap it in place, and press it down. And then all I have to do is swap out that bottom die with the bottom die that kind of looks like the male side. And then carefully put in the pocket piece. Now this piece I have to be a little bit more cautious with because I don't want to mess up the rest of the bag. But I just want to make sure I can see that rivet cap and it's snapped in place on the bottom, and then press it down. Pull it out. And there we go. Now, snap done. And so you can see it's something I did after the fact, and it's still perfect. Still gorgeous. So I just wanted to show you why, another reason why I love my rivet press so much. Okay, so what did you think? It comes together really easy, doesn't it? It's really, I don't want to say easy because everybody's level is different. Everybody's machines are different. Everybody's, you know, dexterity is different. So I don't want to say easy, but it is fairly simple. However, I've been sewing for a few years now, and I sew at least 2 bags a week, every week, for years. And I still learn so much. I mean, doing these pockets, I've never done a secret slip pocket like that before. The techniques that were presented in this pattern were so helpful, and they are techniques that, especially if you're just starting out, these are going to be just good habits. You'll find other patterns for bags that might be much more complicated or more challenging, and they will have a similar process but maybe a different technique that doesn't quite speak to you. You're going to remember this technique, you're going to be like, you know what, I know what I need to do, but I'm not going to use that method from the pattern. I'm going to use the method that I learned from this pattern. Which is just, it's the whole point of bag making, right? You're supposed to develop as a bag maker. So like I just showed you at the end of the tutorial on this one here, I did use my handy dandy rivet press. If you are making bags pretty frequently and this is something like a hobby or maybe even a side hustle that you're like, I think I really want to kind of keep going with this, I do suggest you look into a rivet press. That is my #1 tool that I always recommend to everybody, is a rivet press. I have a whole video going over that pink sucker right there and the green one right next to it, and all of the different die sets and what they do and how you change them and how you know what to buy and what you use them for and what I like to use most frequently. And with that press, there is actually an OklaRoots bundle with cam snaps where you get everything from that video at a discounted price. So again, it's an investment, and it is pretty heavy duty, and it's not small. However, if you're starting out and you're like, I think I really want to continue with this, a tool like that is going to give you a more professional finish, but it's also going to save you a lot of time because instead of having to top stitch these little rectangles, you could just pop a rivet in. It's quicker, easier, not quite as sloppy, and it makes it look really professional. And my favorite probably thing on the die set are these magnetic snaps because they look like rivets, but they're magnets. And they're so lightweight. I just love them. And like you saw, I could add it after I'm done with the bag. No problem. So I hope you enjoyed sewing with me today. If you make this bag and you share it on social media, please make sure you tag me. I'd love to see it. Make sure you also tag Chris W Designs. And if you're using the Bag Making Babe box and you post it on social media, make sure you tag them as well. If you're interested in this subscription box, there is a link down in the description of this video and it will take you straight to the site. There are 2 subscription boxes available. The Babe box for the beginners and the B box, which is a step up from that for more advanced beginners. We're gonna do a lot more technical stuff there. I'll have a couple links down in the description as well of videos that I explained what the bag making bee box is and what the bag making babe box is. I hope you're having a great day. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye guys.